All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is October 3rd, and Oklahoma still sucks.
It is OU week right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson. That is Jake Jimerson there on the megaphone, announcing to the world the time and date that OU sucks, and that is a 24/7, 365 job. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. It might as well be the Oklahoma Sooners. Jake, we've got a fun show for everybody today. Since it is the bye week, we're going a little bit off the beaten track for the most part. Today is our discussion that we've been trying to get to. If you've watched the previous episodes, which we appreciate you if you are returning. However, we made a little bit of a promise that we're going to talk about the NIL Redshirts. That was not discussed in our previous episode. We are going to start the show with that today. Then we're going to kind of get into some of memory lane when it comes to the Texas OU Red River rivalry. And we're going to talk about some notable performances, notable games. Now, Jake and I, we're 30 years old, so our history of the game in terms of us being kids watching it, that's really what we're going to talk about. Now, yes, we know there are notable games that happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and some Texas fans that maybe you're listening. Hey, if you are listening, welcome. All ages are welcome, but 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, who knows? But anyway, it's a very long-lasting rivalry, and we probably won't go that far back. We're going to talk about primarily what we've lived through and, most recent memory. But then again, Jake, most recent memory, some of the best and more notable games have been played over the last 20-some-odd years.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of close classics. Unfortunately, not enough have gone our way, which is one of those bad things about going down memory lane of the last 10 to 15 years, especially. The series has been unfortunately lopsided with Texas not holding up their end. And obviously, we're hoping that's going to start changing. Last year was a little bit of a setback, but hopefully we get some more memories this year. Though I'd prefer more the memory like a couple of years ago when it was 49-0. I look pretty fondly upon that game, even though it wasn't very close.
Jake, I think about that game at least once a week, and I have ever since that game happened. And I will be sitting at my desk in my office, and from time to time, I'll just have a little nice 49-0. That was a good year. That was it'll just pop up in my head out of nowhere. I obsess about it. Yes, rent free, and I'm okay with the rent. I'll pay it every single time. All right, Jake, let's go ahead and dive into this NIL talk. I want to get into it a little bit. These things that I've coined NIL red shirts. I'm not entirely sure if that's exactly what they're going to be called, but I like the term. I'm going to stick with it. You've got players now and programs throughout the country, primarily at the University of Las Vegas, UNLV. They are undefeated this year. They're having a very good year. And the starting quarterback about a week ago, announced prior to the game, in the middle of game prep and the middle of the week, getting ready for Saturday's game, announced that he will be redshirting the remainder of his season and will sit out and not play due to NIL constraints, whether that was things that were not met on his side of things or things that were not met on the school side of things. To the public, that has not really been known. According to him, he had agreed to some certain terms of the NIL that were not met by the school, and I'm assuming money. And then his parents were involved at some point in time. And Jake, I know you probably know a little bit more details on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, details are just kind of what you read from different reports, and there's been a lot of different reports. Some reports have said he was promised 100,000, had received 3,000. He went in to try to collect that and basically was told no. Some reports have been that he was getting what they had agreed upon and then went in and asked for more, and they said no. And that does kind of change, I think, a lot of people's opinion, depending which way that is going. But I also think there's a lot of people who just don't want NIL to be a thing. And I do have thoughts on that we're going to get into, but it's an interesting situation, and one that I'm glad we waited until now, where we kind of have the time to fully discuss it. And if you have any thoughts yourself, leave them in the comments. We're interested to know what people think on this, because it's still pretty new, even though it's been going on for a few years, and it feels like the landscape's changing every single day.
Now, you and I, Jake, we've had many discussions on NIL and some possible regulations that could be implemented to make these things a little bit more kosher. So you don't have these disagreements, so you don't have players just committing during recruitment, and they're promised one thing from a university and they just want to get the bag, and then they transfer out after 1 year of getting that bag, and then they go play for the school that they actually want to play for. We've had these discussions. Now, Jake, I don't know if you and we've exchanged text. I don't think you and I have actually sat down and had this conversation on the NIL redshirt ordeal that happened in UNLV, because not only was it the quarterback, also the running back came out, I think, a day later for the same university, UNLV, and said, I'm going to sit out. My NIL deal has not been met by the program, and I too will be using my red shirt and not participating in the rest of this football season. And then following that, maybe about a week later, Bear Bryant? What's his, not Bear Bryant,
Bear Alexander.
Bear Alexander. Yeah, I think that's correct. A USC defensive lineman announced on Instagram, on social media, that he too is going to use a redshirt year to sit out due to USC not meeting out his NIL agreement. And so that's now 3 players over the last 2 weeks that have decided to use this red shirt. I will start off by saying this, and I'm going to take this point of view for just this argument. Now, there's other points of view to be had, and we're going to get to those here shortly. If the university, if these football programs are not meeting any type of an agreement that these players have agreed to going into their recruitment, during their transfer, whatever that looked like, if money was agreed upon and these players are not seeing that money and they have been told that they are not going to get that money, the program is 100% in the wrong, and they need to follow through with the agreement. And I'm all on board with a player sitting out until that contract is met. That is bottom line right there. However, if a player agrees to certain terms and then happens to be playing better than expected, or feels like they are worth more come week 5 than they were week 1, and they're like, you know what, I think I would like my contract to be looked at mid-season, and I'm going to sit out. That is not okay. You should not be able to do that. And that is something that needs to be looked at if that is what is happening with 1, 2, or all 3 of these players. Whatever is agreed upon during the moment of signing, that should be honored regardless.
Yeah, and what's interesting in all this is I don't believe you're even supposed to have NIL discussions until after you've signed and enrolled. Obviously, we know that's not how it's working, but at the end of the day, that's another kind of kink in this whole thing is you're not even supposed to have a deal agreed upon when you commit somewhere. We obviously know that that is not the case. That's not what's happening. And that's where it kind of goes to this whole, there needs to be some more enforcement. And I do agree with you that, if a player, especially once they've committed, if they have certain commitments made to them, whether that be from an outside company or from the collective that's at the actual school, those obligations should be met. But that's where I think there's a conversation to be had, that especially when they're agreeing to deals with collectives of the school, as opposed to, agreeing to with a local business, but especially with collectives from the school, should there be a requirement that they have to stay at that school for 2 years, 3 years? Should there be an extra contingency on the player, if they are making money from that school? Because otherwise it's going to be a serious problem, I think, especially for outside of the Power 4 conferences, for those teams to keep their players, even if they are paying them and they are making money at all levels of Division I football. They're just going to get poached by a bigger school. And so that's where I think the conversation really gets interesting, is how do we get I think we're starting to see the first signs that this is not a very good system right now. And there's a lot of flaws in it and a lot of problems. But there's a lot of different ways that it could go from here to kind of work that out and to regulate it, if you will.
I'm also very curious as to, since when was it a player's decision to redshirt? Is this a new decision from players that they get to choose when they want to redshirt, just willy-nilly? At least my understanding of a redshirt was it was decided by the coaching staff and by the football program going into the season of who was going to redshirt. Hey, we're going to sit you out for this season. We want you to develop. You're not exactly where we want you to be. We don't think, and we don't want to waste a year of playing eligibility on you developing as a football player for when next year we could use you then. That or an injury. Hey, we had big plans for you. You had an injury week 1. We're going to put the red shirt on you, and then you get to play next year and not use a year of eligibility. That was my understanding of what a red shirt was and how it was used in the first place. I'm not sure if NIL took over and things kind of just switched to where now the players have way more control, and I don't think that that's a great thing for college football. Now, that's one thing where I'm 98% of the time I am player friendly when it came to players getting paid and players looking to get sponsored by outside sources to use their name, image, and likeness to get a paycheck, because these players are worth something while they're playing at school. I was all in favor of that. There was never a point where I was arguing against that. Maybe you know more on the redshirt situation. Like, when do these guys just decide that they can redshirt and just not play anymore?
I mean, this is a new thing as far as players doing this, especially. I mean, it's literally related to NIL issues as to why they're doing it. I'm sure there's been once or twice in the past where a player has redshirted because they weren't happy at the school they were, and they were just like, I'm going to transfer at the end of the year, or they set out, and then that counts as a redshirt, because redshirts are yes decided before the season by coaches, but also sometimes they'll burn that red shirt during the year because they need that player to play in more than 4 games, because 4 games is the standard. If you play more than 4, you can't get redshirted. And so sometimes it is decided during the season. There may be a player they expect to play more and then don't play more and then end up getting to redshirt them. But as far as players just going, I'm redshirting and I'm transferring, this is definitely more times than I can remember in the last decade combined, this happening. And maybe it's just because it's more noteworthy because it's the NIL, but it is interesting and it is concerning, and it does show the need for regulation, whether, and this is another part of this conversation, whether it come from the NCAA or whether the power conferences or the power conferences and the non-power conferences all get together, elect a commissioner, and elect to regulate things that way for football, which I do think is a possibility. And I almost think might be the better route, because I don't know about you. Well, but I have no trust in the NCAA. They are a dysfunctional and corrupt organization.
The less power the NCAA has over these players and football programs, the better, in my opinion. I've never been a fan of the NCAA. In fact, I wish the NCAA would just be abolished, and the Power 4 conferences right now would kind of come together as a committee and elect a commissioner and just let those programs kind of like in a strange way, kind of how the NFL does it with their owners electing or hiring a commissioner to basically run the league. I kind of want college football to run that way, and maybe you've got multiple commissioners, maybe you've got a committee of commissioners, because you've got 130 some odd teams out in the country. You can't really be responsible for all of those. Maybe you've got the Power 5 conferences, maybe you got the G5 conferences. Maybe that's how maybe they figure something out that around that. But at the end of the day, something needs to happen where regulations and commitments are honored, and then they're also had and agreed upon to, and they are lived out despite what I think, especially, I think if I were certain businesses outside of the program, now, if there's school incentives, maybe the school can write up some sort of contract and say, hey, if you are signed here, you are guaranteeing yourself to play at a minimum of 2 years here, at this salary. But if I'm also, Lamborghini in Austin, and I'm signing, Quinn Ewers to an NIL deal. Hey, if you transfer, this NIL deal is done. You can live out this X amount of dollars, a $1.2 million NIL deal. But if you transfer out, maybe you see none of it, or you see half of it, or whatever, and have that be some sort of incentive for these players to stick around a little bit longer.
Yeah, and this gets even more confusing and crazy when you think about, like, in Missouri, for instance, where state legislature has passed a bill that allows these players to start making NIL money in high school once they commit. And I think we're going to start to see more and more states do that, because sooner or later in Alabama or Georgia is going to get that passed. And then Texas is sure as heck going to want that to get passed in their state.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think that should not be allowed. If I think if a committee or the NCAA should step in and do that. And kind of my other thing with this whole thing is, originally my thing with players making money has always been that they should be able to make money off of their own name.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean I think they should make money from the school. I don't know if I really support just the school paying the players. Maybe if there's a cap, but even then it just doesn't feel right for college athletics. But players making money from local businesses, doing advertising, like we've seen with Lambeau, or being able to make their own brand, like we saw Bijan do with the Bijan mustard. I have no problem with that. And the story I always kind of talk about whenever I have this discussion with people is there was a track athlete. It wasn't at Texas, but it was a track athlete in Division I, like a couple decades ago, or maybe 15 years ago. And they had created a water bottle company and they were making a bunch of money through it. The NCAA stepped in and basically just said, you're making this money because of your name, image, and likeness. That is not allowed. You either need to quit the sport or sell your business. They quit the sport. And I don't think that's right, that they had to quit doing the sport they love just because they had a successful business that they made. And so that's kind of always been my thing, is the NCAA doesn't have the right to tell you that you can't make money off of your name, and your likeness from playing on the football field, from running on the track, from playing on the volleyball court. But it starts to not feel right to me once you just have these school collectives. And I know Texas benefits from this, and they should do it. You have to do it as long as it's allowed. But I would rather it go to kind of what I think NIL was supposed to be. It was intended to be originally, and not so much just about school collectives making a bunch of money and being advertised at the stadium, and asking fans to donate to pay players directly.
No, I do 100% agree with that. I am on board with that. And that was kind of the original statement of, I support players in terms of wanting to get paid and this, that, and the other. Like, they should do whatever they need to do to get paid. Like, I do think that there is a vast difference as to what we saw with Eric Dickerson and Merrill Hodge at SMU and the Pony Express. Like, I think there's a big difference between that, and then I think there's a big difference between that and even what Johnny Manziel did at Texas A&M. He was just getting paid by outside companies to appear at parties and things. That should be perfectly fine to do. If outside, if a club wants to say, hey, Johnny Manziel, we're going to pay you $1 million to show up here and just get drunk with all of our patrons, that's on him. That's also on the coaches in the program to be like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that. But you know what? If you want to, and you're not ready to play by Saturday, then, that's on us and that's on you. But it should not be, I agree that it should not be the funds should not be coming from the school to pay the players, which is obviously being done. And it's not even being hidden at this point. But if Quinn Ewers wants to do a Dr. Pepper commercial and be the deputy of Flavortown or whatever, he should absolutely be able to do that.
Yeah. The commercials to me are exactly, what I would like to see allowed. I have no problem with that. And I actually like it. I think it promotes the sport. I think it's good for the sport. But I would love to, if someone is really educated in this stuff, because I don't know all the finer details of it when it comes to these collectives, because I know they are doing certain things and they're probably sliding through loopholes to be able to pull these collectives off. But whether or not on paper they're directly affiliated with the university, they are directly affiliated with the university. And that's obvious because I know that these collectives are going through a lot of legal process and a lot of different things to make sure that they are abiding within the current rules and regulations. So I do think there's a lot of rules being broken, but I do think the collectives for the most part are probably working within the rules and regulations, but it's because there really aren't good enough rules and regulations to abide by. And right now it's just kind of leading to craziness, where the transfer portal is essentially free agency. The transfer portal has a lot of other issues too, like teams who go to the playoffs are kind of late to the portal. Those players don't have as much time to declare for the portal. And so there's just a whole lot of craziness in college football that makes it hard to keep up with, quite frankly. And it's even harder to figure out what all the exact rules and regulations are. And it should be pretty black and white and easy to follow at the end of the day, but it's not.
Well, and I think I do think they will get that done with time. They have the transfer portal has been around for a long time. A lot of people don't realize the transfer portal has been around for a very, very long time, longer than since you and I have been alive. Players just have not ever utilized it. And there's never really been much of an incentive to utilize the transfer portal, especially nowadays with money being involved. It is very much like you said, and we keep making comparisons to the NFL in terms of a free agency. Well, the NIL and the way that they're using it to incentivize players within the program is also kind of like a salary cap. Again, I hate comparing college football and making the comparisons to making it seem like it's the NFL, because then you're kind of taking away the amateur section out of it. Again, I'm perfectly fine with players getting paid outside of the school. It's when the school is doing it. That's what we're having an issue with here. And it just not being regulated. I think even if they put a cap on it, like, hey, every school across the country is allowed this amount. And it's an amount that every single school can afford. $500,000 within NIL funds to give away. That doesn't give Texas a huge advantage. That doesn't give, Alabama a huge advantage over, say, a UNLV or a Boise State. Like, those programs probably have or can come up with $500,000 to give away in NIL deals. It's kind of like a scholarship situation or something along those lines. I don't know how it works. I don't know how they're going to regulate it, but the transfer portal also needs to be regulated, and it shouldn't just be a free for all. It should be it should be a transfer portal season, if you will, kind of like a recruiting season or a national signing day. There should be a start day to it, and that probably should follow the national championship, where no team can start mingling and tampering and getting players on board when the season's over. There's probably needs to be a February date that it starts, and then you get them in, start of, I don't know, from February to maybe June or something, and you get them in for summer camp or something along those lines. I don't know how long that season takes, how long that should usually go, but there does need to probably be a deadline for those sorts of things that hasn't really been established yet.
Yeah, and also a limit. I don't think a player should be transferring 3 or 4 times. Quite frankly, at that point, I think it gets, and you can joke around about this, but a lot of players don't end up going pro or don't end up having a long career. And I still think you should be promoting getting your degree unless you're going to be a top pick, where you're going to get at least one sizable contract. And so once you're transferring between schools 3 or 4 times, I feel like at that point you're hurting your education too. And that can't get lost in all this, because at the end of the day, regardless of whether they're getting paid by schools, regardless of whether they're getting paid by outside businesses, they are college students. It still is college football. I think it still feels like college football, even though they have all this going on. There just needs to be some clarity around it and some very obvious boundaries made.
Yeah, where boundaries haven't been made at all. Because you've got a 9-year senior at Miami right now. The dude is probably making NIL deals for 3-4 years now. He has now made a career of being a college football player. And you can now do that, apparently, and you can use your red shirts and you can use injury years and
part of that's COVID. Part of that is COVID.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed. You won't have a 9-year senior probably ever again. However, it is the world that we currently live in within the college football ranks. And I am really ready for the COVID players to be done with. But I agree, Jake. I think there should probably be a cap on the amount of transfers you have in your career, maybe 2. It probably is maybe pushing it. I would think maybe 2 would be the most you can transfer. but yeah, Jake, this conversation can go on and on and on, and we're actually already approaching the end of the show, and so we should probably just keep it going for the next 5 minutes or so. But those are kind of the ideas that I have.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm not going to keep kind of talking the same points because at the end of the day, that's just what I believe, and we're going to continue to monitor it. And as news breaks, this will be something we talk about on the show because I'm sure there's going to be more discussion around it. I'm sure coaches are going to start talking about it even more, and eventually, I think something is going to happen, whether it be the power conferences kind of breaking out and forming a committee or a commissioner, or whether it be the NCAA stepping in and doing something useful, which is probably the most unlikely thing to happen out of all this.
I would not hold my breath for the NCAA to step in swiftly, decisively, and have an answer that everyone's going to love. Within the last 4 minutes of the show, let's go ahead. Quinn Ewers has been officially named the starting quarterback going into the Red River rivalry, something all Texas fans were kind of anticipating. We were all kind of expecting it. We had Jake Solis on and talking about his injury, and he was like, yeah, it's probably a couple weeks. I would think that he sits out against Mississippi State, and he'll probably be ready to go by Oklahoma. And so that's where we see ourselves. Jake, big news, kind of man news, or, just good news to officially have a stamped, yes, Quinn Ewers is expected to start.
I think it's good news to just get it this early. He's not practicing this week. I know last week, it's from what I actually read in the last couple days, it does not sound like he was maybe practicing as much as we thought. He was definitely not getting the reps with the ones. That was all Arch Manning. It was more of he was off to the side, kind of throwing, doing stuff, but not really actually practicing. And so it's good to hear that he is back. He is practicing this week because he needs that, because I know he came back 2 years ago off of injury and played really well. That OU defense was a lot worse than the OU defense that Texas is going to see here in just about a week. And so he needs to get some practice reps in. He needs, the Texas defense to be getting after him at practice so he can start to get a feel again for that pressure. Because I do think he's probably going to see the most pressure he has to this point in the season in that game, even more than Michigan, which he actually really wasn't pressured much in that game. And so he needs to be ready to go. And hopefully, more than anything now, I just want to hear a report that he's 100% or he's 95%. Yeah. I don't want it to be 85% going into the game, because I imagine the lower the percentage, the more likely it is for a re-injury.
Well, not only that, but Jake, you can guarantee you that Danny Stutzman on the other side of things is going to be looking to hit Quinn at any given point in time. If he's got a hit, he's going to take it. And if Quinn rolls out, or if Quinn has to scramble around and has to take a dive or slides, you can almost guarantee there's going to be an OU player that's going to be trying to aim. Not saying they're going to play dirty. That's just how football works, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to try to hit Quinn and make him feel uncomfortable and make sure that his presence is being felt from the defense of OU. Is coming back from an injury, and you haven't played in a couple weeks. And so the last competition you played was UTSA, and you didn't get hit against Michigan. They're going to try to make him feel as uncomfortable as possible. And I would like him to be ready to go. That was kind of my point, even dating back, if he was capable of playing Mississippi State, that I wanted him to play Mississippi State if he was healthy enough to do it. He obviously wasn't, didn't need to play in that game, but just to get hit sometimes is what it takes for a quarterback to kind of get their juices flowing a little bit more.
Yeah, and we both kind of agreed on that point, was wanting to see him take a hit. Obviously, that didn't happen. It was probably for the best. We got to see a really fun Arch Manning performance out of it. But I think you and I think 90% of the Texas, at least, because there are some ones that I see on social media that don't have the best opinions. But the majority of fans I've seen are happy that Quinn is going to be back. They understand that as fun as Arch was, as good as he was, I don't think you want him making his third ever start against Oklahoma. I think we'd all like to see Quinn back in the offense, running things efficiently. It just feels like things run really smooth when he's in. And I do think he is the leader. I mean, you look at him,
he's the Iceman.
Was it the Monroe game, or was it the Mississippi State game, where in between the third and fourth quarter, he had the team around him, and he was pumping them all up. And
That was
that's
that
what
was
we found
UNL.
even in pads.
Yeah, that was ULM where he was pumping them up going into the fourth quarter. But it was also against Mississippi State where he was the Iceman. He had everybody's jewelry on. He was iced out. He had who was it? I think it was Malik Muhammad's chain. He had the big number 5 or somebody.
He had Jaden Blues as
Jaden
well.
Blues, yeah. He had about 5 chains around his neck. He had about a 2 or 3 big diamond watches on and stuff. So yeah, he was the jewelry man. He was the ice man for Mississippi State. So the team loves him. The team trusts him. Obviously, I wouldn't give just anybody that diamond necklace. I can tell you that much. But yeah, I think the team rallies around Quinn. I think they're going to play really hard for him, especially this probably being his last OU Texas game. This is kind of his senior season, if you will. This is going to be his last hurrah, and I think everybody knows that. I think the team's going to rally around that fact as well.
Yeah, and the quote that kind of came out with the release that he was going to be playing was basically, there was no way he was not going to play in this game. He's ready to come back. He is ready to win an SEC championship and a national championship. And part of that mission, I guarantee you, is ending this series for him with a winning record, which a Texas quarterback has not done in some time, unfortunately. And beating them going out, leaving Danny Stuntsman not being able to make a t-shirt this year after a win, and just kind of shutting them up after last year, because I'm sick and tired of hearing about 34-30 in a season where Texas ultimately was the better team, and it showed as a full sample of the season versus one game. But this year they need to win this game. I think for confidence, I think for the fact that they play Georgia the very next week. You do not want to be going into Georgia right after a loss, feeling like your season is essentially on the line.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for watching. Thank you for returning to watching us. Tuesday through Friday, we will be releasing these episodes at noon. And then on Saturdays following the game, we will give you our immediate reaction right here on YouTube and where all podcasts can be heard, whether that is Spotify or whatever your device is. All in Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.